A cold, flat sound cut through the first-class cabin. I will ask one last time. This seat is not for you. Lauren Mitchell, 34, delivered the line like a blade slicing the air. A few passengers looked up. A few looked down, pretending not to hear. But everyone felt it a storm forming. In seat 2, a Dr. Olivia Carter, 39, sat with her back straight silent, like a still lake before a storm. She lifted her gaze, dark eyes deep cold. No reaction, no explanation, no fear. Only a silence so steady it made Lauren's skin prickle. Lauren snatched the boarding pass from Olivia's fingers, almost tearing it from her hand. She held the ticket up under the warm yellow cabin lights, squinting, flipping it front and back, as if checking the papers of a criminal suspect. Then, with a sharp smack, she slapped the ticket against Olivia's chest, the sound echoing like an indirect slap. Don't think sitting in an expensive seat makes me believe you. That seat is for qualified passengers. Her voice was high and sharp, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. A wave of irritation rippled through the air. The man in seat, 1C Robert Haynes, 52, raised his phone camera, pointed at Olivia. He smiled a thin smile, the kind worn by someone convinced the world is always on his side. In seat 1, D. Evelyn Moore, her silver hair catching the light, whispered to her husband, another one pretending to be fancy. I see it all the time. The cabin's rhythm shifted. Resentment, arrogance, and prejudice blended into one thick atmosphere. But Olivia didn't shift. She stayed silent. Silent enough to unsettle Lauren to the point of trembling. Lauren switched her camera on, turning it toward herself for a live stream, her face stretched into a hollow smile. Hello, everyone looks like more drama in first class. Someone thinks they can sit wherever they want. Viewer count climbed 234789. Each number fueled the fire. Meanwhile, Olivia simply watched. No blinking. No movement. A second camera lit up this one from Robert's seat in 1C. A whisper full of disdain floated out entitlement at its finest. A perfect example. Lauren pressed a hand to her headset, pretending to speak with ground staff. Send security to Gate 7A. We have a passenger refusing to leave someone else's first-class seat. Her voice held the confidence of someone who believed she was acting correctly legally and with full support. Evelyn smiled in approval. Isabella Rivera, in seat 3B28, turned away. She did not dare speak, but her eyes told a different story, something like shame on someone else's behalf. Heavy footsteps thudded on the jet bridge floor. 2 security officers stepped into the cabin. Officer Daniel Martinez, tall and broad-shouldered eyes stern. Beside him, Officer Laura Kim, her expression calm but distant. What is the issue? Martinez asked, without even looking at Olivia. Lauren pointed aggressively. She's in the wrong seat. Her ticket is definitely invalid. She refuses to move. Martinez nodded immediately, without checking, without verifying. Ma'am, gather your belongings. We need you to leave the aircraft. His voice was sharp, like an order carved in metal. More passengers began filming. A few cameras shook slightly. A few muttered, "That's right," under their breath. Olivia remained composed, her breathing steady. She slid her fingers across her phone screen, sending 3 short messages. No one saw the content, but the faint glow on her face revealed something too calm, too precise, as if she had expected every step. Robert zoomed his camera in, whispering into the mic. They are about to remove her. She's about to learn an expensive lesson. Viewer count rose 156, 100, 79, 204. Lauren smirked, triumphant. See, real passengers don't act like that. Invisible prejudice seeped into the cabin. Staring eyes. poisonous whispers, judgments formed without evidence. A middle-aged black man in seat 4, C. Michael Turner, 48, stood up. "Excuse me, but I saw her ticket. I saw when she showed it to the attendant." Martinez raised a commanding hand. "Sir, sit down. This is a security matter." Michael did not move. "No, this is a discrimination matter." The cabin fell silent, a silence heavier than shouting. Lauren spun toward him, eyes blazing. "You don't know anything. She's trying to trick us." Olivia turned her head, giving Michael a gentle nod of gratitude. Then she looked straight at Martinez. "I will not leave the seat. I am waiting for the flight command team's decision." Lauren burst out laughing, mocking. "You think the captain will come for you?" Her voice dropped sharp as steel. "You are nobody here." The cabin tightened like a drawn bowstring. Emotions layered over each other, growing harsher, exposing the core of a system full of bias. Messages kept lighting up on Olivia's phone like heartbeats. She did not react. Not one word of defense. Lauren stepped closer, biting off each word. "You chose the hard way. Now deal with the consequences." Evelyn nodded satisfied, as if watching proper punishment unfold. Martinez stepped back half a step, hand touching his radio. "Prepare to remove her from the plane." Isabella turned away, hands clasped tightly. Michael clenched his jaw. Robert smiled in satisfaction. Lauren lifted her chin, certain she was about to win. Olivia remained still as stone, as though she already knew what was coming, as though she was waiting for someone important, someone with more authority than anyone in the cabin. Then a deep male voice thundered from the front of the cabin, "Stop, immediately." The entire cabin turned. Captain Jonathan Reed stood in the doorway. His face was tense, his steps quick, heavy, purposeful. The air shifted with every step, as if someone had walked in, carrying a real storm. He looked at Lauren, at Martinez. Then his eyes landed on Olivia. In 2 seconds, his eyes widened, as if he had just realized he was facing the one person he should never have touched. Lauren inhaled sharply. Martinez froze. Robert lowered his camera slightly. No one understood. But Olivia understood. She tilted her head a fraction. Cold eyes. Steady. Not surprised. She knew. She always knew. She knew exactly who she was. And they did not. They were about to remove the wrong person, the very wrong person. No one in the cabin managed to take a breath as Captain Jonathan Reed stepped deeper down the aisle. Each of his footsteps struck the floor like a hammer, pounding against the very order Lauren believed she controlled. "Explain." One word. Short, heavy, sharp as metal. Lauren instantly straightened her voice, trembling slightly but trying to recover its authority. "Captain, this passenger?" Reed raised his hand, a blocking gesture, quick, abrupt, slicing the air like a bullet. "Not to me. Give me her boarding pass." Lauren's throat tightened. She remembered very clearly she had slapped that ticket against Olivia's chest, as if striking someone who did not belong here. Olivia gently handed over the crumpled boarding pass. Reed accepted it with both hands, not out of courtesy, but because he understood the gravity behind every action taking place. The air thickened. The only sound was the slow, cold unfolding of paper. Reed read it. His eyes stopped. His pupils tightened. First class. Seat 2A. Name Olivia Carter. Not wrong, not mistaken, not fraudulent. He looked at Lauren. He said nothing. He did not scold her. He just looked. But that look was enough to send a chill running from the base of Lauren's skull down her spine. "What did she present to you?" the captain asked. Lauren swallowed, struggling to steady her voice. "Captain, I suspected because her appearance did not match." Reed cut her off, his voice icy. Match what? Say it plainly. The cabin froze. Lauren stammered. Match the profile the standards of first class pass. Reed tilted his head, gaze sharp as an X-ray. Standards that you invented just now. Lauren's face drained of color. Her hand behind her back trembled. Officer Martinez stepped in. Captain the attendant reported that the passenger refused to comply. Reed turned toward him. Officer Martinez, did you check her ID? No, Captain. Did you verify anything in the system? No. Then why were you preparing to forcibly remove a passenger from the aircraft? Martinez went still. His voice cracked under the weight of the truth. Because the attendant insisted, Reed stepped forward. We do not forcibly remove people just because someone insists. The air seemed to stop. Reed looked directly at Martinez, his voice cold enough to chill the cabin. Let me make this absolutely clear. If you drag a first-class passenger with a valid ticket off this aircraft, your entire team will each be writing a 19-page report, and all of you will be called in for a hearing. A wave of murmurs spread across the cabin. Lauren clenched her fists, her face turning pale. Evelyn Moore whispered, I think this is being exaggerated. Isabella sat upright, her eyes fixed on Olivia. For the first time in the entire flight, she truly felt the weight of the injustice crushing the woman in seat 2A. Captain Reed lowered himself slightly to Olivia's eye level, an action almost unheard of. Extremely rare. Ma'am, would you like me to call the regional manager to the cabin immediately? His voice did not sound like a question. It sounded like an offer of power. Olivia did not answer right away. She opened a small leather case and placed a business card face down on the tray table. That single gesture changed the color of the cabin. Reed looked at the card as if staring at a loaded weapon. He had suspected, but he had not dared to believe it. Are you certain you want me to verify this? His voice lowered not out of fear, but because he understood that if the card was genuine, this entire event was a systemic disaster. Olivia nodded. Reed flipped the card. 1 second of reading. His entire body froze. Then a sharp breath escaped between his teeth. Lord! Several passengers in rows 1 and 2 sat bolt upright. Robert jerked his hand, the camera trembling. Lauren covered her mouth. Her face drained of every drop of blood. Martinez stepped back half a step. Isabella whispered, voice breaking, Impossible. Captain Reed straightened, adjusted his cap, his chest rising as though preparing to stand in front of a federal courtroom. He turned to Martinez and Lauren. Step. Back. Now. 3 words. Each one hammered. No one argued. No one even breathed too loudly. Miss Carter, the captain, said, his voice deep with respect. I will verify immediately with the operations center. Olivia closed the leather case slowly. No rush. But the motion alone was enough to slice the cabin's collective breath in half. There is no need to hurry, she said, her tone soft but carrying the weight of command. I want to see how your system handles this mistake. Captain Reed bowed his head deeply to a passenger, something no one had ever witnessed on an aircraft. The cabin drowned in a mix of fear and reverence. Rising tempo, rising tension. No one knew the worst part had not yet begun. Because this was only the beginning of the earthquake, the first-class cabin was unnervingly quiet. Not the refined silence of luxury, but the tense hush of a courtroom moments before a verdict. Captain Reed set his phone down. The color had drained from his face. The confidence of a pilot with 30 years of experience had vanished, replaced by a tension pulled tight like a stretched wire. He turned to the security officer. Officer Martinez, step away from your position. Do not touch this passenger. Do not make decisions. Do not speak." His voice was not loud, but it was sharp, decisive, allowing no room for reaction. Martinez barely managed captain. Completely silent, it was the kind of order delivered by a captain who understood that a single misstep could cost the airline hundreds of millions of dollars and its national reputation. Lauren Mitchell stood as if ripped out of the ground, her hands frozen, her posture locked. She tried to maintain a tight smile, but her facial muscles no longer obeyed her. Captain I was only following Pro-C Reed, turned facing her fully. Following procedure, he pointed at Robert's camera, still recording. "You live-streamed. Inside the cabin. Without permission. Without warning. Passengers." Lauren swallowed hard. "It was just an internal vid. Do you know the company's privacy policy? Or do you think federal regulations are a joke?" Lauren's eyes trembled. She backed into the cabin storage unit. Robert watched through his camera, and for the first time, the smug smile on his face vanished. He had filmed the insults, the discrimination, but he had also filmed a serious policy violation committed by a flight attendant, and that video was live streaming, which meant it could not be recalled, could not be deleted, could not be denied. Isabella Rivera clasped both hands, her palms slick with sweat. She looked at Olivia, who sat motionless, as if everything unfolding was happening to someone else. In that moment, Isabella understood this calm was not ordinary. This was power silent, but absolute. She whispered just loud enough for herself to hear. She knew everything from the start. Captain Reed raised his specialized radio. "Bring the flight operations manager and the regional operations chief to the aircraft. Immediately." Seconds later, rushed footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. 3 people entered at once, tension etched across their faces. Mark Phillips, 45 years old, the flight manager who had been confident earlier, now looked ghostly pale. Sarah Jenkins, 50 years old, the regional operations chief. Thomas Blake, 41 years old, head of safety and compliance, the person with the highest authority in the airport at this moment. They stepped into the cabin as if stepping into the aftermath of an explosion. Captain What Hap Mark didn't finish. Reed cut him off. "You were moments away from ejecting the CEO of the company that owns more than 40% of our fleet." Every word struck Mark like a hammer. Mark staggered back a step, his knees nearly giving out. Sarah Jenkins exhaled sharply, trying to hide the tremor in her breath. Thomas Blake adjusted his tie, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. I need to verify." Sarah managed her voice, unsteady. Reed lifted the business card, the golden Carter Aerospace logo, reflecting into their eyes. Thomas Blake inhaled sharply. "My God. It is real," Mark Phillips choked out. "I didn't know. I only acted based on the attendant's report." Olivia lifted her head. At last she spoke. Not loudly, not harshly, just with the tone of someone who knew she stood on top of the power structure. It was not a report. It was prejudice. Her voice sliced through the air like a razor. The cabin froze. Miss Carter Sarah Jenkins said, drawing a shaky breath to regain professionalism, "We sincerely apologize for this inappropriate experience. I assure you," Olivia raised her hand, "a single gesture. Final. I do not need promises." She looked directly at Sarah, her gaze so cold that the woman felt her chest tighten. "I need procedure and accountability." Maria Rivera, the only person who had not recorded anything, covered her mouth as tears welled. She understood that this moment was not just about discrimination. This was an entire system being called out, dragged into the light. Miss Carter, Captain Reed, said per your request we can summon legal representatives and the regional director. All further decisions will follow your direction. The air compressed, as if the cabin itself was shrinking. All eyes turned to Olivia. She slowly closed the leather case, every movement calm, deliberate, unshaken. No need for many people. Her voice was serene, almost conversational. I want to hear explanations from the ones who made the wrong decisions at the very beginning. Silence fell like a gavel. She did not look at Lauren, nor at Martinez, nor at Mark. But all three knew she was speaking to them. One by one, Olivia continued. Tell me why you believed I did not deserve to sit in the seat I paid for. The question cut through the cabin like a laser. Lauren opened her mouth. No sound came out. Martinez tried to speak. Nothing. Mark's hands shook so violently he dropped his clipboard. This was no longer a conversation. This was judgment. The entire cabin held its breath. Olivia leaned back slowly, her dark eyes calm, yet razor-sharp. Begin, she said. I am listening, and the weight of the entire cabin fell upon three people who had pointed the spear of prejudice at a woman they did not know, a woman who sat at the top of the entire aviation industry. And this was only the opening statement of the real reckoning to come. The cabin felt thick like fog before a storm. Every gaze from passengers, from crew members, from security, locked onto the three people standing as if they were defendants before a court: Lauren Mitchell officer, Daniel Martinez, and Mark Phillips. Olivia Carter said nothing. She simply looked at them, calm, silent, as though waiting for a countdown clock to hit 0. It was the kind of silence that made it clear who the power belonged to. Isabella Rivera clenched her hand so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Robert stopped recording because his hands were shaking. Evelyn Moore sat hunched, looking as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Captain Reed stood beside Olivia, like an executioner awaiting instruction. Lauren Olivia said first. Only one word, a name, no title, no courtesy. Lauren looked like she had been dragged onto a stage under a spotlight. Sweat glistened on her face, her hands twisting together. Tell me, Olivia said, her voice gentle but so sharp that Martinez flinched, the real reason you claimed I did not have a valid ticket. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed too loudly. Lauren opened her mouth. Her throat tightened. I was just following my work, intuition. Intuition? Olivia raised an eyebrow. I asked for a reason, not a feeling. Lauren glanced desperately at Captain Reed. Reed folded his arms, his expression cold as steel. No rescue. Lauren swallowed hard. Because you did not look like the first-class passengers I usually see. The air in the cabin detonated in silence. No one needed to explain what that meant. Olivia tilted her head. You mean I did not look luxurious enough, not wealthy enough, or not white enough? Lauren looked as if she had been slapped with her own thoughts. No, I did not mean that. I thought you looked ordinary. I assumed. You assumed a black woman, dressed simply, could not sit in. Seat 2A, 3 seconds of silence. No escape. Lauren trembled, her eyes reddened, not from remorse but from despair. Olivia turned her gaze to Officer Martinez. Officer Martinez, she said you were ready to drag me off this plane based on one attendant's word. No checking, no verifying, no looking at my ticket, no checking my ID. Martinez drew a long breath. He had to speak. There was no hiding. Ma'am, I thought. He looked down at his shoes, his voice cracking. I thought you were causing trouble. Olivia remained silent, just looking. And that look made a man with 20 years of security experience feel as though someone was drilling straight into his conscience. "Let me ask again," Olivia said, slow and precise, each word a blade. "What did you see? A disruptive passenger or a black woman sitting in a place you did not think she deserved?" Martinez clenched his fists. His shoulders shook. He tried to speak but only managed one sentence. "I misjudged. An admission, but nowhere near enough to soften the truth." Finally, Olivia turned to Mark Phillips. This man shook more visibly than the other two. He knew that if the CEO of an aerospace corporation decided to act, his career was finished. "Mr. Phillips," Olivia said, "you are the flight manager. It is your duty to verify every claim before taking action." Mark straightened, trying to look composed, but his voice cracked. I take responsibility. I failed to follow proper procedure." "No." Olivia cut in her voice, sharp as a blade. "You did not forget procedure. You ignored it." Silence fell. Then Olivia continued, "Because you trusted someone else's story and did not trust me." Mark bit his lip. His eyes watered. "I was overwhelmed by pressure. I thought if both the attendant and security agreed, you thought their bias was evidence." Mark could not answer. He could not say no, and he did not dare say yes. The cabin shook with a suffocating silence. Isabella burst into tears. "Michael Turner in row 4. C shook his head in disappointment. Several passengers lowered their faces, ashamed that they had remained silent, that they had judged her too. Robert set his phone down and whispered, "My God, I was wrong." Olivia folded her arms and sat up straight. The cabin lights highlighted her face. Cold, composed, not angry. She did not need anger. Power did not need to shout. "All three of you," Olivia said, "have just exposed the real problem in this system." She raised one finger. Prejudice. A second finger. Abuse of authority. A third. Fear of responsibility. The three individuals before her bowed their heads as though their shoulders had been marked with 3 indictments. Olivia stood up for the first time since everything began. The click of the seatbelt releasing sounded like a small explosion in the cabin. She looked around the room, her voice low, yet forceful, every word a verdict. "And today I will correct all of that." The entire cabin held its breath. Olivia continued Captain Reed. "Here, ma'am," he answered instantly, standing as if responding to a military order. "I want the disciplinary meeting conducted right here, in this cabin, with every staff member involved." Reed nodded, immediately, and then, as if fate had timed it perfectly, the internal announcement sounded. "The regional director is approaching the aircraft door. Please stand by." Lauren squeezed her hand so tightly her fingers turned purple. Martinez lifted his head, then lowered it again. Mark nearly stumbled backward. Because they all understood, this moment was no longer a flight disruption. This was the beginning of a restructuring, a reckoning, a lesson for an entire system. And at the center of the storm stood Olivia Carter, the woman they had tried to remove from a seat she owned more than any of them ever imagined. Rushed footsteps echoed from the jet bridge, heavy and urgent, impossible to mistake. The cabin froze. A silence so thick it could be sliced with a knife settled over first class. Then he appeared in the doorway. Richard Coleman, 51 years old, the regional director responsible for all of the airline's West Coast operations. Dark blue suit, grey tie, the presence of a man more accustomed to issuing orders than apologizing. He walked into the first-class cabin with the energy of someone convinced he was the most powerful person in the room. but he did not yet know he was merely a small fish stepping into an ocean. Captain Reed Coleman asked, his low voice cutting sharp. "You called for red-level priority. What could possibly be this serious?" Reed stood tall without hesitation, without deflection. "We nearly attempted to forcibly remove a fully valid passenger from the aircraft, a passenger of extreme importance." Coleman frowned. Important, how Reed glanced toward Olivia. That 1-second glance felt long enough for every heart in the cabin to stop. Coleman followed the captain's gaze. His eyes landed on Olivia Carter, and just as Reed expected, the blood drained from the regional director's face. No, Coleman breathed, barely able to speak. No, it cannot be. Olivia simply sat there, silent, powerful, as though the cabin's light existed only to illuminate her, while everything around her faded into shadow. Reed handed Coleman the business card. Coleman's fingers trembled as he read the words, "Olivia Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Carter Aerospace Holdings." The entire cabin heard his sharp, uncontrollable inhale. Coleman snapped toward Lauren. "Tell me, what have you done?" Lauren collapsed inward like a small animal cornered. Her voice broke. "I thought I assumed she was not a first-class passenger, based on what Coleman demanded. No one asked that question expecting an answer. Everyone already knew the reason. They simply wanted her to say it, to face it." Lauren choked on her own breath. Tears streamed down her face, but no one pitied her, because everyone in the cabin knew accountability was the bare minimum. Coleman turned to Officer Martinez. "You are security. Why did you not verify the ticket? Why did you not check a procedure? Why were you preparing to remove a passenger from this aircraft?" Martinez closed his eyes. "Because I trusted the attendant's report and the procedure." "Did you let the procedure die?" Coleman thundered. Martinez bowed his head, silent, as though counting each mistake he had made. Mark Phillips, the flight manager, tried to stand steady, but fear showed in every inch of his posture. "Sir, I take full responsibility." Olivia cut him off, her voice cold as cracking ice. "No, Mr. Phillips, your responsibility is not just full. Your responsibility is everything." Mark froze. His gaze dropped to the floor. "You saw me present my ticket," Olivia continued. "You saw me remain calm. You saw no evidence of wrongdoing, and you still chose to trust prejudice over procedure." Mark could not speak. The entire cabin could hear his trembling breath. Coleman turned back to Olivia, and in a moment no one ever thought possible. He bowed his head. "Dr. Carter," his voice strained, "I offer my deepest apologies. This is a systemic failure. My team's failure. My failure." Olivia did not answer. She let the apology fall to the floor like something too light to matter. Then she spoke, her tone even mechanical, but each word hitting the spine of the system like a hammer. "I do not want apologies." Coleman froze. His eyes widened. "I want solutions." The cabin held its breath. No one blinked. "I want to know," Olivia continued, "how you plan to respond when your staff has just committed an act of discrimination in front of dozens of witnesses and hundreds more watching live stream." Lauren nearly collapsed. Martinez stood still, barely daring to breathe. Mark squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable judgment. Coleman swallowed hard. "We will terminate Attendant Mitchell, suspend Manager Phillips, initiate an internal federal-level investigation." "Not enough," Olivia said instantly. She did not need to think. She did not need to hesitate. Her voice rang out like metal striking the floor. "I want a full evaluation of every frontline team member in this region." She looked directly at Coleman. "I want the bias training system rebuilt." She turned to Martinez. "I want the incident handling procedures rewritten so no one can abuse authority based on instinct again." Then she looked at the entire cabin. "And I want a full report in 48 hours. Coleman nearly choked on his own breath. We will do it. All of it. I give you my word." Olivia nodded, acknowledging the statement like a judge recording testimony. No emotion. No compromise. Just fact. When the cabin thought the storm might finally be easing, Olivia looked up, her eyes sharp as an X-ray beam. "There is one more thing." The entire cabin shifted. Some passengers grabbed their armrests. Some swallowed hard. Some began to shake. Olivia looked at Coleman, then at Reed, then at everyone. "I want all of you," she said, "to invite the passengers of this cabin to attend the disciplinary meeting taking place right here." A blow to every expectation in the room. "Because every one of them," she said, her voice cold and commanding like a decree from above, "has witnessed the truth. And the truth belongs in the open, not behind closed doors." The cabin erupted in gasps and whispers. Isabella sucked in a breath. Michael Turner sat upright. Evelyn covered her mouth. Robert lifted his camera again, but not out of curiosity this time. He knew he was watching history unfold. Coleman stood stunned, but he understood. This was no longer an airline incident. This was a matter of justice, and the woman before him was the epicenter of the earthquake. Olivia Carter looked straight at the three people whose misconduct had just been laid bare. And she ended the opening chapter of this reckoning with a single sentence that silenced the entire cabin: "Begin." The first-class cabin had transformed into a courtroom carved out of stone. There was no sound of rolling suitcases, no clicks of seatbelts fastening, no impatient sighs waiting for takeoff. Only eyes. The eyes of everyone on board, all fixed on the woman in seat 2. Olivia Carter, the center of the storm. Regional Director Richard Coleman stood before her like a student summoned to the front of the class, stripped of rank authority and years of experience. Captain Reed stood behind him, like a witness waiting for the truth to be revealed. The three who had made the mistakes, Lauren, Martinez, and Mark, stood before the first class rows, their backs straight, as if awaiting a verdict. Olivia intertwined her fingers gently, slowly, but with an icy precision. A small gesture, yet it tightened the entire cabin, another notch. "Begin," she repeated. Her voice was not loud, but no one dared not to listen. Coleman spoke first. "Dr. Carter, per your request, we are all present. I would like to begin the resolution meeting." Olivia cut in sharp as a blade. "Call it by its real name." Coleman blinked. "You mean?" Olivia looked directly into his eyes. No emotion. No tremor. "This is not a meeting. This is an investigation. On site." The cabin seemed to tilt. No one had ever heard anyone speak to a regional director like that, with a voice soft enough to whisper, yet sharp enough to slice the system open. Coleman lowered his eyes. "Yeah. This is an on-site misconduct investigation." "Say it again," Olivia ordered, her voice so sharp it sparked in the air. Coleman swallowed. "This is an on-site investigation into the misconduct of our team." A few passengers exhaled quietly, but filled with emotion. It was the first time the truth had been named correctly. Isabella Rivera whispered. Finally someone said it. Olivia turned her gaze to Lauren Mitchell. "Ms. Mitchell, we start with you." Lauren nearly collapsed, but forced herself to stand straight. Her lips trembled, her fingers clenched together. Olivia leaned back slightly. Not to relax, but the way an executive settles in before opening an interrogation. You called security. You live-streamed. You publicly humiliated me online. I want the real reason, not the trained answer. Lauren opened her mouth, her voice thin like a thread. I misjudged. I thought you did not belong in first class, based on... Olivia asked. Lauren fell into a terrifying silence, based on what Olivia repeated, sharper, firmer. Lauren burst into tears. Based on your appearance! The cabin ignited in shock. Isabella covered her mouth. Robert lowered his camera, ashamed. Evelyn turned away. Olivia did not flinch. And what about my appearance made you doubt me? Lauren could not speak. But everyone knew. It was not the simple blazer, not the handbag, not the hair, not the watch. It was the color of her skin. Olivia did not need Lauren to say it. She simply let the truth expose itself through silence. Olivia turned to Officer Martinez, who stood like a man suspended in midair. Officer Martinez, she said softly. But Olivia's softness carried the weight of a congressional hearing. Why were you ready to forcibly remove me without checking my ticket? Martinez inhaled sharply, his voice breaking. I trusted the attendant. And I thought, when a passenger refuses to leave their seat, that is disruptive behavior. Did you see me being disruptive? No. Did you see me yelling, arguing, or insulting anyone? No. Then what you reacted to, Olivia said, was not behavior. She tilted her head. It was me. A direct strike at the blind spot of aviation security snap judgments, rooted in bias. Martinez bowed his head. I was completely wrong. Finally, Olivia faced Mark Phillips, the flight manager, who stood like a man awaiting a prison sentence. Mr. Phillips, Olivia said you had the power to stop this entire situation. But you did not. Mark shook. Dr. Carter, I saw the attendant. I saw security agreeing. I assumed they were right. You assumed, Olivia interrupted. As a manager, you do not assume. You verify. Mark's breath hitched. Yes, I failed. Olivia nodded, not with sympathy, but as acknowledgement. Coleman stepped in, trying to regain control. Dr. Carter, I understand the severity. I will immediately suspend the entire team, launch a regional investigation, and Olivia raised her hand. Coleman fell silent instantly. I do not want internal discipline. Her voice was low but cold as hardened steel. I want systemic correction. Coleman swallowed hard. What kind of correction? Olivia locked eyes with him, her gaze sharp enough to carve through the cabin. I want you to examine why 3 people, in 3 different roles, a flight attendant, a security officer, and a manager, made the same mistake. She raised one finger. This is not personal failure. A second finger. Not an accident. A third finger. It is culture. The words fell across the cabin like thunder. Coleman gasped. You want us to change the culture? Olivia did not smile. Did not soften. I want you to be forced to change it. The intercom crackled with ground control's voice. Passenger monitoring shows 214 viewers currently watching the live stream. A crowd is gathering at the gate. Media outlets are being alerted. The cabin shuddered with tension. Lauren sobbed uncontrollably. Martinez stood frozen. Mark took a step back, his hands pressed to his head as if being tried in public. Coleman turned to Olivia, trembling for the first time. Dr. Carter, what do you want us to do right now? Olivia placed her hands on the armrests. She sat straighter. The cabin lights illuminated her face, as if she were seated on a judge's bench. Right now, she said slow and sharp, I want you to announce publicly, right here in this cabin, that your decisions were wrong, and that they will be corrected. Coleman's mouth opened, stunned. And Olivia continued, "I want every passenger here to hear you say it." The cabin exploded with silent intensity, a silence so powerful it shook the air. Coleman looked around. More than 20 passengers stared at him, waiting for him to say what airlines never dared to admit. He drew a trembling breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice wavered, "we were wrong." The cabin rippled with gasps. Some passengers exhaled in relief. Some teared up. Some looked at Olivia no longer as spectators, but as students before a teacher. Olivia did not react. She let the words settle into the air. Words that would spread across social media within minutes. But she knew one thing. This was only the warm-up for the earthquake to come. Regional Director Richard Coleman stood there, as if his soul had been poured into the words, "We were wrong." But before that admission could even fall to the cabin floor, Olivia Carter lifted her head. Her gaze was razor-sharp, devoid of satisfaction, untouched by emotion, offering no mercy. Acknowledging wrongdoing, she said slowly, her voice low. Each word sharpened like metal is not the end. The entire cabin tightened, as if gripped by an invisible hand. Olivia placed her palms on the armrests, leaning forward slightly, the cabin lights catching the edge of her cheekbones like a courtroom spotlight on its lead figure. "Now," she said, "we talk about correction." Coleman swallowed like a man trying to digest ground glass. "Dr. Carter, what would you like us to do?" Olivia looked at him the way someone examines a simple equation a student is too slow to solve. "Not what I would like. What you will do." First, Olivia said, her tone sharp enough to make the entire cabin shudder. "I require every frontline employee of this airline, all flight attendants, security officers, and managers, to undergo retraining on bias discrimination and incident handling." Coleman nodded quickly. "We're within 30 days. Olivia cut him off. "At most," Coleman's mouth fell open, "30 days. That program requires," Olivia locked him with a stare. The stare of someone sitting above every rung of the power ladder. "I manage a corporation operating 300 aircraft. Do not talk to me about required time." The entire cabin turned toward Coleman. He did not dare look at anyone, only nodded. "Yes, 30 days." Olivia leaned back, fingers intertwined. "Second," she said, "I want a new protocol. Any complaint regarding a ticketer seat or a passenger's identity must be verified in the system before anyone even considers touching a customer." Martinez shivered. Mark bowed his head lower. Coleman scribbled notes with a trembling hand. "Understood, it will be executed immediately." Olivia continued, "No more attendants making conclusions on their own. No more security acting on instinct." Her voice sliced right into the heart of the system. "From today, forward verification comes before judgment." Several passengers whispered softly, "Finally third." Olivia continued, "I want an independent oversight board, including passenger representatives, industry experts, and legal supervisors." The cabin rippled with shock. Passengers overseeing the airline. No airline had ever dared attempt such a thing. Coleman stiffened. "We allowing passengers to participate in internal oversight would," Olivia spoke lightly, "be the only way to guarantee transparency." Coleman had no rebuttal. He exhaled in defeat. "Agreed." Olivia slowly released the armrests. Her voice dropped, but its coldness sent a chill down Coleman's spine. "Fourth, I want a direct reporting line to me for any accusation of discrimination." Coleman nearly choked. You want reports sent directly to Carter Aerospace." Olivia looked him in the eyes. I want every airline operating my aircraft to be accountable. If they operate my assets, they will behave accordingly." No one spoke. No one dared. Because she had just rewritten the balance of power between manufacturer and airline. Olivia folded her arms. "Fifth, I want an official public apology, not to me, but to every passenger who has ever endured the same treatment." The cabin fell silent, a silence heavy but filled with hope. Isabella cried softly. Michael Turner nodded with his eyes glistening. Coleman swallowed slowly. "We will comply." Olivia continued her voice, like the final ruling of a Supreme Court. "Not will comply. Do it. Today." At that moment, the cabin seemed to explode, not with noise, but with the sensation that an invisible wall had shattered. Lauren Mitchell stood frozen mascara, streaked at the corners of her eyes. Martinez stared at the floor, unable to lift his head. Mark Phillips clasped his hands behind his back, like a man awaiting his sentence. Olivia glanced toward them, not with contempt, not with anger, but with the cold, objective judgment of justice. She said, "The four of you," her eyes flicking toward Coleman. "Mark Martinez and Lauren are products of the system, which is why I will correct the system." The air vibrated as though stretched to its limit. Coleman's voice shook. "Dr. Carter, do you have any other requirements?" Olivia lifted one eyebrow slightly. Not a smile, not approval, just a signal that the hardest part was done. "But not finished. I do," she said. Coleman felt the blood drain from his body. "I want the airline to present all commitments right now," Olivia said in front of every passenger who witnessed this event. The entire cabin gasped. No airline had ever done such a thing. No CEO had ever forced an airline to bend at the knees inside its own aircraft. Coleman looked around the passengers' eyes on him like a jury. He inhaled deeply, nodded, understood. Olivia settled back into seat. 2A, the seat they had tried to remove her from. Her voice was soft, but strong enough to make the cabin tremble. "Then speak." And just like that, the reform began right there on the airplane, in the stunned eyes of everyone on board. Regional Director Richard Coleman stood at the front of the cabin like a man preparing to read out a death sentence. The confidence of someone accustomed to authority was gone. The posture of a man used to pointing downward was gone. He stood there under the eyes of passengers, crew members, and the very woman they had once tried to drag out of her seat as if she were a fraud. "Ladies and gentlemen," Coleman began, his voice dry, as if his throat were coated in ashes. "The airline extends its deepest apology for the misconduct you have just witnessed." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Some raised their phones, some held their breath, some stared with disbelief. Even long-time first-class flyers had never heard a genuine apology from an airline, but today they heard one. Coleman continued his voice, trembling slightly. "The passenger in seat 2, a Dr. Olivia Carter, was mistreated, misjudged, and targeted by a series of decisions that violated protocol. That is our responsibility." Lauren's fingers dug painfully into each other. Martinez stood still like a cracked stone statue. Mark Phillips bowed his head so deeply his face was no longer visible. And therefore Coleman said, voice tightening, "The airline will begin reforms immediately." Olivia remained still. No nod, no reaction, just observing, cold, sharp, powerful. That silence alone pressed down on Coleman like a rising tide. Coleman drew a deep breath. Then he stated clearly, word by word, "First commitment, all frontline employees will undergo mandatory retraining within 30 days." A passenger sucked in a breath, the way someone reacts to an announcement capable of reshaping an entire industry. Second commitment: no passenger will be questioned or forcibly approached without full verification in the system. A woman in seat 1D began to cry softly. She whispered to her husband, "This should have happened long ago." Third commitment: we will establish an independent oversight board, including passengers. A wave of disbelief swept through the cabin. Someone whispered, "Unbelievable." Fourth commitment: all accusations related to discrimination will be reported directly to Carter Aerospace at the request of Dr. Carter. The cabin froze. Robert lowered his camera, not from shock anymore, but from respect. Fifth commitment: the airline will issue a public apology today. Coleman's eyes flickered, as if he were on the verge of collapsing. But Olivia remained silent. A silence with the weight of a judge waiting for the next statement. Coleman turned to her. "Dr. Carter, I have stated all commitments as you requested. Would you like anything added?" Olivia did not answer immediately. She allowed a heavy silence to blanket the cabin, the kind that made those at fault feel as if they were standing under an interrogation lamp. Then Olivia stood. A small movement, yet the entire cabin seemed to tilt toward her. She looked around, meeting each gaze, each face, each witness of this crisis. When her eyes landed on Lauren, the cabin seemed to lose all warmth. "Lauren Mitchell." "Olivia," said her voice, flat, but so sharp it sounded like metal striking metal with every syllable. "You live-streamed me to hundreds of viewers. You publicly humiliated me. You applied personal bias to your duty." Lauren trembled violently, mascara streaking around her eyes. "I am not the one who decides your disciplinary outcome," Olivia continued, "but I am the one who determines whether this airline will change to protect future passengers." Coleman inhaled sharply. "Ms. Mitchell will be terminated," he announced, voice heavy and final effective immediately. Lauren collapsed into a nearby seat, her face pale as ash. No one applauded, no one celebrated, no one objected. It simply needed to happen. Olivia shifted her gaze to Officer Martinez. "Officer Martinez, she said your duty is to protect passengers, but you trusted an attendant's word instead of doing what was required verifying." Martinez nodded, his voice hoarse. "I accept responsibility." Coleman added, "Officer Martinez will be suspended for retraining and reevaluation, a decision no one challenged." Finally, Olivia turned to Mark Phillips, the flight manager. "Mr. Phillips," she said, "you were not the one who discriminated, but you were the one who feared conflict, who feared standing on the side of justice, who feared doing what was right when others were doing wrong." Mark lowered his head even further. "You will be reassigned to training and temporarily replaced," Coleman announced. Mark did not protest. He simply said softly, "Thank you for allowing me the chance to correct myself." The entire cabin looked at Olivia, not as a victim, but as a leader reviewing the sentences of a rapid-fire reform. Olivia exhaled lightly but firmly. "Good." The cabin relaxed for exactly 1 second. Then Olivia added, sharp as an arrow, "But there is one final matter." Coleman looked up, sweat forming at his temples. Olivia turned toward the passengers. "These commitments mean nothing if they remain spoken only in this cabin." She looked at Coleman again. "I want the airline to send the full list of commitments to every passenger present today within 12 hours in the form of an official document signed by senior leadership." This was not a request. It was an order. Coleman nodded quickly, voice breaking, We will do that." Olivia sat down. A faint trace of satisfaction appeared, not triumph, but confirmation. that justice had begun to shift in the right direction. The entire cabin exhaled, not because everything was over, but because they understood they had just witnessed the beginning of a historic reform. And it happened right here, inside this aircraft cabin. The disciplinary meeting inside the first-class cabin was not even finished when outside a far more violent storm had already begun forming. Passengers' phones vibrated non-stop. Screens lit up in flashes. Notifications stacked on top of notifications. News alerts, comments, live streams, hashtags, spreading like a wildfire. In only 7 minutes, the video recorded by Robert Haynes, originally just a clip of a seat class misunderstanding, had already passed 34,000 views. Then, a comment from a blue check account appeared. Is that Olivia Carter? That single question dropped like a match onto a pool of gasoline. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, every platform exploded at the same time. The hashtags ignited. Carter Aerospace, Flightgate, racial profiling in the air, she owns the plane. That last hashtag, she owns the plane, became a whirlwind. It spread like a bullet through every platform, every industry group, every news channel. Aviation analysts wrote, "This airline tried to remove the CEO of the company that owns a 300-plane fleet, plus maintenance contracts. This is the biggest PR disaster in 10 years. A financial analyst tweeted, "The airline stock is dropping fast. Investors are pulling out. Isabella Rivera opened her phone, her hands trembling. Oh my God, people are watching this. The whole world is watching," to Michael Turner. Exhaled slowly, a mix of satisfied justice and disbelief shining in his eyes. That is what prejudice costs when it targets the wrong person. In the 20 minutes between Captain Reed stepping into the cabin and Coleman bowing his head in apology, Financial Analytics recorded the airline's stock down 1.8%, $24 million in market cap, erased more than 16,000 tweets posted in 10 minutes, and 6 online articles already published. Coleman received an urgent message from top leadership. "Richard, what is happening out there?" He shuddered. He did not dare answer. He did not dare look at Olivia. He did not dare imagine the CEO of the parent company dialing in. Pilots, flight attendants, and ground staff across the United States began whispering. A well-known pilot posted, "If that really is Dr. Olivia Carter, this airline is finished. Washington and Carter Aerospace control nearly half the leasing market." A flight attendant in Chicago wrote, "This is insane. Live streaming in first class, who allowed her to do that?" An airport manager in Denver commented, "We have heard reports. Federal representatives may be dispatched." Each comment added another layer of concrete to the wall of pressure, collapsing onto the airline's leadership. Passengers could not take their eyes off Olivia. She sat still, neither tense nor worried. She was the axis, and everything outside media, finance, legal forces was rotating around her. A young man in seat 2C asked, voice shaking, "Dr. Carter, did you know this would get this big?" Olivia tilted her head slightly, answering gently, "All it takes is one person live streaming." The answer sliced straight into the heart of the system. Lauren Mitchell broke into heavier sobs. She had never imagined that one impulsive action could throw an entire airline into a firestorm. Martinez twisted his hands, eyes red, knowing his career was balanced on a ledge. Mark Phillips stood like a man watching a skyscraper collapse in front of him. A new notification flashed on Mark's phone, CNN requesting passenger interviews. Another alert lit up Coleman's screen. NBC confirms a news crew is heading to gate B7. A passenger gasped. Look, Fox News just posted, CEO mistreated aboard the very aircraft her company leases to the airline. Robert stammered. This is bad. This is really bad. Coleman wiped cold sweat from his brow. We have to control the media situation. Olivia cut him off with a sentence that dropped the cabin into absolute silence. No. Not control. Transparency. She looked straight at Coleman. I do not need the airline to hide this. I need the airline to take responsibility. Coleman swallowed, feeling as though he was swallowing a stone. We understand. Isabella whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Dr. Carter, you are not only fighting for yourself, you are fighting for all of us. Olivia looked at her, and for a brief second, only a second, her eyes softened. No one deserves to be treated the way I was today, she said, especially those who have no voice. Michael Turner nodded firmly. Finally, someone powerful enough to make them listen. Olivia gazed out the window. Sunlight pierced the runway like a blade cutting through clouds. This, she said softly, is only the beginning. The cabin did not yet know that within minutes, this incident would escalate to the front page of every major news outlet, an emergency meeting of the airline's executive board, airport, police stationed for protection, thousands gathering at Gate B7, and the Department of Transportation issuing an initial statement. But the cabin understood one thing with perfect clarity. Olivia Carter was not just winning a personal battle. She was reshaping the aviation industry. From Seat 2A, Seattle-Tacoma Airport was no longer an airport. It was the epicenter of national media. At Gate B7, camera flashes burst like fireworks. Reporters crowded in rows. Travelers gathered around. Security rushed to set up barriers. Inside the first class, cabin phones kept vibrating. New notifications poured across screens every second. CNN breaking news, NBC special report, FAA requests, immediate review, stock alert, airline, down 3.2%. Coleman stood frozen. His eyes widened as he stared at his phone like he was looking at the obituary of his own career. My God, he whispered. They are calling for a federal hearing today. Olivia sat quietly, gazing out at the runway, as if she had known all of this would happen from the very beginning. The cabin speakers came alive this time, with the urgent, heavy tone of airport operations, control requesting Captain, read FAA representatives are en route to the aircraft. All passengers must remain in the cabin. Isabella gasped under her breath. FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. Michael Turner shook his head, half impressed, half horrified. This airline just stepped into federal law territory. Coleman turned to Olivia, voice shaking. Dr. Carter, do you want us to delay them? We can request the FAA to postpone. Olivia did not look at him. She simply said, no. Let them in. One word. Soft, but it nailed shut the fate of dozens of people. Two individuals stepped onto the aircraft. A silver-haired woman, Linda Harmon, 58 years old, FAA Chief Inspector. A broad-shouldered man carrying a file case, David Cho, Senior Federal Investigator. They entered the cabin like two blades aimed at the airline's heart. Coleman stepped forward. Inspector Harmon Wee Linda raised a hand. One word, Mr. Coleman. Silence. The entire cabin straightened in their seats. Linda looked around, her gaze sweeping the rows like safety inspection lights. Then she stopped at Seat 2A. Her eyes softened slightly, but her voice remained sharp. Dr. Carter, we have reviewed the full live stream and the preliminary reports. David Cho opened the file and prepared documents. Linda continued. And the FAA needs to confirm this directly with you. Do you wish to file this incident as a federal violation? Coleman's face turned ashen. Martinez could barely stay standing. Lauren collapsed into a seat, hands covering her face. Mark Phillips swallowed hard, the sound heavy as stone. The entire cabin held its breath. Olivia sat still. The moment moved slowly like a frame in slow-motion film. The world seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. Then she looked directly at Linda Harmon, her voice quiet but heavy as a sentence. Yes. But I want it handled the right way. Linda nodded gently, as if she had waited years to hear someone say those words. Then she said, "The investigation begins today." David Cho read aloud the list of violations, clear discriminatory treatment, abuse of authority by the flight attendant, misuse of security protocol behavior in violation of FAA Standard 121.580 breach of passenger privacy via live stream failure of flight management procedures to meet federal requirements. Each item hit the cabin floor like a hammer. Lauren sobbed. Martinez bowed his head. Mark flinched. Coleman stood like a melting statue. Linda turned back to Olivia. We will prepare the full case and are ready to impose sanctions on the airline unless you request an alternative approach. Coleman nearly collapsed. He gasped, "Dr. Carter, please. If the FAA finds us directly, we will lose our international roots. We will lose certification." Olivia turned her head toward him. Her gaze was neither cold nor angry. It was simply the truth. You pushed your passenger to the edge. But I do not want innocent people to lose their jobs. The cabin froze. No one knew which way she would turn. Then she said, "I want reform, not destruction." Linda smiled softly, like someone witnessing rare, righteous use of power. "Then we will follow your request," she said. "The FAA will supervise the reform process, and the airline will sign the commitment today." Linda placed the document on Olivia's tray table, Federal Conduct and Procedure Reform Agreement, effective immediately. Coleman asked nervously, "Dr. Carter, would you review the agreement before we sign?" Olivia flipped through the pages. Every sound disappeared. All that remained was the faint whisper of paper, sliding against paper, soft but sharp as a blade. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. No one breathed. Olivia closed the folder and handed it back. Approved. 1 word. But it saved an entire airline from a federal lawsuit. Coleman signed. Mark signed. Captain Reed signed. Thomas Blake, head of safety, signed. Linda signed last, stamping the FAA seal, the sound landing like a judge's gavel. Linda turned to leave, but Olivia said, "Wait!" Everyone froze. It felt as if the world would shift depending on what she said next. Olivia stood up, her first time leaving the seat since the crisis began. "One more thing," she said. Linda turned. Coleman held his breath. Lauren sobbed uncontrollably. Martinez stood like a severed wire. Passengers sat upright. Olivia looked across the entire cabin. "I want every person present today to receive an official message of appreciation. Not because they stayed silent, but because they witnessed. And witnessing is more important than silence." The cabin responded with a silence that carried weight. Coleman bowed his head the second time that day. "We will comply." When the FAA left, when the reform agreement was signed, when the cabin's air finally returned, Olivia stood before everyone and said a sentence that sent chills through every spine. "Today they did not just try to remove me from this seat. They tried to remove all of us, those judged at a glance." The cabin fell into a silence that was deep, painful, and true. Olivia continued, her voice low, but resonant enough to reach through ribs. And today, we pulled them back into place. Not with shouting, but with truth. A pause. Then, for the first time in the entire ordeal, applause began. From one person, then two, then the entire cabin. Captain Reed stood tall, face stern, but filled with respect. Isabella cried as she clapped the hardest. Michael nodded with heartfelt admiration. Robert lowered his phone, clapping for the apology he owed himself. Olivia stood in the center of the storm, calm, powerful, silent. She did not raise her hands. She did not smile. She did not revel in victory. She was simply a woman who understood one thing: justice does not need to be loud. It only needs not to be ignored. And today, right here, in Seat 2A, she had forced an entire system to listen. In the world of aviation, where procedure is treated as absolute and power is considered untouchable, what happened at Seat 2A was a painful but necessary lesson. Every system, no matter how large, can be bent by prejudice, and it can also be corrected by one person who knows how to stand tall. Not because Olivia Carter is a CEO, not because she owns aircraft, but because she understands a principle that every civilized system must honor human dignity, is never something to negotiate. Today's crisis did not end on that plane. It opened a larger conversation about the way we look at one another, judge one another, and sometimes unintentionally damage one another. A small cabin became a mirror, reflecting an entire society. If you believe in stories that expose the truth in moments where the underestimated rise and reverse the entire outcome with strength and clarity, then, like this video, so the story can reach farther. And subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the journeys ahead. The journeys where justice doesn't need to shout it, only needs to be seen. Finally, leave a comment with the phrase, "Stand tall," to remind ourselves that sometimes one person standing tall is enough to make an entire system step back.